Good evening, students. Tonight, we set sail on a voyage through the fjords of history to uncover the truth about one of the most misunderstood and intriguing civilizations of the ancient world, the Vikings. Often painted as horn-helmeted brutes with an appetite for plunder, the real story of the Vikings is far more fascinating. They were explorers, traders, shipbuilders, poets, and lawmakers. They traveled farther than most ancient peoples, reaching as far west as North America and as far east as Central Asia. In this episode, we'll quietly explore their rise, daily life, seafaring skills, religion, and the legends they left behind. So find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and allow your mind to drift like a longship on calm waters. And if you're still awake by the end, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more sleepy wisdom, and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Long before they were feared across Europe, the people who became known as Vikings lived simple lives in Scandinavia. Modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark were home to rugged terrain, deep forests, and icy coastlines. It was a place where survival required resilience, community, and cleverness. The term Viking didn't originally describe a group of people. It was a verb, to go a Viking, meaning to raid or explore. These early Norse people were farmers and fishermen, living in small wooden homes with turf roofs. They raised livestock, grew barley, and relied heavily on the sea for food and trade. As their population grew and land became scarce, they began to look beyond the horizon. Their need for opportunity and adventure would soon reshape the world's coastlines. This hunger to explore would be the spark that lit the Viking Age. The Viking Age officially began in the late 8th century. Most historians point to the year 793, when Norsemen attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in England. It was a brutal raid and it shocked the Christian world. Yet to the Norse, it was simply a strike against a wealthy, undefended target. The raid was not just about violence, it revealed something more strategic. The Vikings knew where to strike and when, and they understood the value of surprise. This event marked the beginning of 2 centuries of expansion, not just in warfare, but in migration, trade, and cultural exchange. From that moment, Viking longships would become the dread and wonder of Europe's coastlines, and it was only the beginning of their restless journey outward. No symbol defines the Vikings more than the longship. Sleek, symmetrical, and swift, it could glide across oceans and sneak up rivers with equal grace. Its shallow draft allowed it to travel far inland, deep into foreign territory. It was light enough to be carried over land when needed, and yet sturdy enough to survive the open sea. Viking longships could reach speeds of over 10 knots, an incredible feat for their time. The craftsmanship involved was precise and communal. Shipbuilders passed down their knowledge from generation to generation. Decorative carvings often adorned the prow, sometimes with dragon heads meant to ward off spirits or scare enemies. These ships were more than transport. They were a cultural symbol of power, freedom, and identity. Without them, the Viking Age could not have happened. Contrary to popular belief, the average Viking did not spend every day raiding and conquering. Most of them lived quiet lives in villages scattered across the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia. Homes were long, wooden halls shared by families and livestock alike. Fires burned in central hearths, filling the space with warmth and smoke. The work was seasonal and communal, ploughing in spring, harvesting in autumn, hunting in winter. They valued craftsmanship, storytelling, and oral history. Tools were simple but effective, and clothing was made from wool and leather. Marriage, family, and social status were central to life, and while society was patriarchal, women often held more rights than in many other parts of medieval Europe. There was beauty in the simplicity of their daily lives and strength in their togetherness. Viking society was surprisingly organized. They had a strong sense of justice and community governance. At the heart of it all was the Thing, a local assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes and pass judgments. The law was mostly oral, memorized and recited by elders known as law speakers. Punishments ranged from fines to exile, but honor and reputation mattered more than legal codes. Blood feuds could erupt between families, but mediation was often sought to keep peace. Social ranks included nobles, freemen, and slaves, yet social mobility existed. A slave could buy their freedom, and a farmer could become a chieftain through bravery or wealth. It was a world where personal honor and collective duty held equal weight. Viking women lived in a male-dominated world, but they were far from powerless. They could own land, inherit property, and even initiate divorce. In their households, women were often the ones in charge while the men were away. They managed farms, raised children, and oversaw food stores for the long winters. Archaeological finds show women buried with keys, a symbol of authority in Norse homes. Some sagas even speak of shield maidens, fierce female warriors who fought alongside men. While historians debate the extent of this, there is no doubt that Norse women were respected and influential. Marriage was often arranged, but women could voice objections, and in some cases powerful widows became political figures and landowners in their own right. It was a nuanced balance of restriction and autonomy. The Vikings worshipped a rich pantheon of gods full of drama, chaos, and wisdom. Odin, the one-eyed god of war and knowledge, was chief among them. Thor, his hammer-wielding son, was the protector of humanity and thunder. Loki, the trickster, brought both trouble and transformation. Their myths were passed down orally, filled with grand tales of heroism and doom. The Norse cosmos was structured around Yggdrasil, the great world tree connecting 9 realms. They believed in fate known as Weird, and that even the gods could not escape it. Ragnarok, the end of the world, loomed as a constant reminder of life's fragility. These myths were not just bedtime stories, they shaped how the Norse saw their world, their enemies, and their purpose. The Vikings had a writing system based on characters called runes. These angular letters were etched into stone, wood, bone, and metal. The most common version, the Elder Futhark, had 24 characters. Later, it evolved into the Younger Futhark, which had fewer characters and was used during the Viking Age. Runes were not just used for communication, they carried magical and symbolic meaning. A single rune could invoke protection, victory, or healing. Runestones, tall stones carved with inscriptions, were often raised as memorials to fallen warriors or ancestors. Some were highly decorative, mixing art and language in beautiful swirls and knots. Runic literacy was limited, but the messages they left behind still whisper across the centuries. They offer a glimpse into Viking memory, loss, honor, and belief. The image of Vikings as ruthless pillagers isn't entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. Raiding was a part of Viking life, but it was strategic, seasonal, and often highly organized. Targets were chosen for their wealth and vulnerability: monasteries, towns, and coastal settlements. The raiders used speed, surprise, and psychological shock to their advantage, but they also took captives, gathered intelligence, and sometimes settled in the very lands they attacked. Loot included gold, livestock, textiles, and slaves. However, many Viking raids evolved into something more permanent: migration and colonization. They often came as warriors, but stayed as farmers and traders. The line between invader and immigrant was often blurred. To understand the Viking raid is to understand ambition cloaked in chaos. Not all Viking journeys were violent. Many were purely commercial. The Vikings were skilled merchants, weaving themselves into global trade routes stretching across continents. They travelled the rivers of Russia, reaching Constantinople and even Baghdad. They traded furs, walrus ivory, honey, and slaves for silver, silk, wine, and spices. Arabic coins have been found in Viking graves, and Viking goods have turned up in Central Asia. The port city of Hedeby was one of the largest trade hubs in Northern Europe. In these markets, languages and cultures mixed. Norsemen bartered with Franks, Slavs, and Moors. Trade brought wealth, but also knowledge and innovation. It connected the cold shores of Scandinavia to the warm cities of the East. As they explored and raided, the Vikings also settled. They established colonies across the British Isles, Ireland, Iceland, and beyond. In England, they controlled a region known as the Danelaw, where Norse customs mixed with Anglo-Saxon life. In Ireland, they founded coastal cities like Dublin and Wexford. Iceland became a major Norse stronghold, with settlers fleeing overcrowding and seeking new opportunity. Greenland followed, with hardy souls braving extreme conditions to carve out a new home. Even the shores of North America were not untouched. We'll explore that journey soon. These settlements were often peaceful, blending with local cultures over generations. Viking legacy endures in place names, genetic lineages, and cultural traditions across these lands. Long before Columbus, Norse sailors reached the shores of North America. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, led an expedition to a land he called Vinland. Believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland in Canada, Vinland was described as fertile, with wild grapes and salmon-filled rivers. They built temporary structures and attempted to settle, but tensions with local indigenous people made it difficult to stay. Archaeological evidence at Lanzo Meadows supports these accounts. Though the settlement was short-lived, the voyage showed the Vikings' daring and navigational prowess. They crossed the Atlantic using only stars, wind, and experience. It was a brief but astonishing chapter in Viking history, and a reminder of their reach. Viking warriors were not only fierce but also disciplined and well-equipped. They favoured speed and mobility over brute strength. Their primary weapons were spears, axes, and swords, often handed down through generations. Shields were round and wooden, often painted with simple designs or clan symbols. Helmets were common, though they did not have horns. Chainmail was prized but rare, worn mostly by wealthy warriors or chieftains. Combat was often in formations, using tactics like shield walls to overwhelm enemies. Raids could be small-scale skirmishes or larger coordinated campaigns. They fought for land, wealth, and honor, and their reputation for ferocity often caused cities to surrender without a fight. To be a Viking warrior was to live on the edge of fate. Death was not the end for a Viking. It was a journey to the afterlife. Funerals were elaborate and symbolic. A chieftain might be buried in a ship, surrounded by weapons, goods, and sometimes sacrificed animals or servants. The ship was either buried under an earthen mound or burned in a dramatic blaze. Cremation and burial practices varied by region and status. Grave goods were chosen to aid the journey to Valhalla or another realm of the dead. Runestones often marked graves, telling stories of the deceased's deeds and lineage. These ceremonies honoured both the individual and the community. They reflected belief in a world where death was not feared, but faced with courage and ceremony. Even in mourning, the Vikings embraced legend. The Viking legacy lives on through their stories. Sagas were epic narratives passed down orally, then written centuries later in Iceland. They told of gods and monsters, but also real events, voyages, battles and betrayals. The saga of the Volsungs, the Prose Edda, and the saga of Eric the Red remain well known today. These tales blended fact and fantasy, grounding myth in the world of men. Characters were flawed and complex, facing gods, fate and family with equal measure. They were not just entertainment, they were moral lessons and cultural memory. The sagas gave the Norse a way to preserve identity in a changing world. And today, they still captivate the imagination of readers and scholars alike. By the 10th century, many Vikings began to adopt Christianity. At first, they were skeptical, viewing the new religion as weak or foreign. But trade, diplomacy and marriage gradually introduced Christian influence. Kings and chieftains saw conversion as a way to align with powerful European neighbours. Harald Bluetooth of Denmark was one of the first to convert, followed by Olaf Tryggvason in Norway. Missionaries arrived, often protected by local rulers. Pagan temples were replaced by churches, and runestones began to carry crosses alongside Odin's name. Some resisted fiercely, clinging to the old gods and rituals, but over time, Christianity took root, reshaping law, art and culture. It was not a clean break, but a slow blending of old and new faiths. The Viking Age gradually came to a close by the 11th century. The reasons were many: stronger defences in Europe, internal strife, and the spread of Christianity. The once feared raiders began to settle, farm, and integrate into the societies they once attacked. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 is often seen as a symbolic end, when King Harold of England defeated a large Norse invasion. It marked the last major Viking assault on England. By then, Viking leaders were kings, not raiders, and their ambitions turned inward. The longships docked more often than they launched, but their legacy was already carved into the coastlines and cultures of Europe. Even after the Viking Age ended, their impact remained. The English language absorbed many Norse words like sky, egg, and window. Place names in England and Scotland still bear their mark. Laws and customs in regions under Viking control influenced future governance. Norse mythology inspired countless works of literature, from Shakespeare to Tolkien. Modern-day festivals in Scandinavia celebrate Viking heritage with pride and colour. In Iceland, Old Norse is preserved more purely than anywhere else. Their stories continue in museums, in books, and in the names of our weekdays. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are all named after Norse gods. Their cultural fingerprint has not faded, it simply changed shape. Popular culture has often distorted the Viking image. The horned helmet is a 19th century invention, not historical fact. Vikings did not fight in berserker rages as often as movies suggest. They were not a unified people, but many independent tribes and clans. They weren't just raiders, but explorers, farmers, lawmakers, and poets. Modern DNA studies show they were genetically diverse and not purely Scandinavian. Their legacy was built on adaptability, not just aggression. Reclaiming the truth about Vikings means seeing them as whole human beings. It allows us to admire their accomplishments without glamorizing their violence. The real story is deeper, richer, and far more interesting. Today, the Viking name carries a mix of awe, curiosity and cultural pride. In Norway, Sweden and Denmark, Viking heritage is celebrated as a national treasure. Reenactments, museums and archaeological sites draw millions of visitors each year. Modern Scandinavians embrace the adventurous spirit of their ancestors. Viking imagery has also been adopted by sports teams, musicians, and even tech companies. Television shows and films continue to keep the myth alive, for better or worse. Yet scholars and storytellers are working to correct misconceptions and celebrate the truth. New discoveries still emerge, buried beneath the soil or written in forgotten scripts. The Viking spirit endures, not just in battle cries, but in curiosity, craftsmanship, and courage. And perhaps that is the legacy worth remembering most. And so, dear students, our longship drifts to a gentle stop. We've sailed through storms and stories, explored myths and migrations, and discovered that the Vikings were far more than warriors with axes. They were dreamers, builders, and seekers, crafting lives from the frost and fire of the north. Their legacy whispers through languages, customs, and the very spirit of exploration itself. As you drift off tonight, may your dreams carry you across calm fjords and ancient shores. Until our next lesson, rest well, students.